Subscribe to my YouTube channel, share it with your friends, and comment your thoughts. The heat of the midday sun bore down relentlessly on the bustling streets of the city. Cars honked, people rushed by, and the air shimmered with the intensity of a summer scorcher. But amidst it all, there she stood, a figure so ordinary yet so utterly extraordinary in the way she seemed to disappear into the crowd, unnoticed, unimportant. Yet she was about to make an impact that no one could ever have predicted. She was a young girl, not much older than 20, with dirt-streaked skin and a tired, hollow look in her eyes. Her clothes were ragged, worn from countless days of toil. In the scorching heat, she wasn't begging for money, but her actions spoke of a life so far removed from luxury it might as well have been another world. In her hands, she clutched a small plastic bottle, the water inside nearly gone, but it was enough. It was always enough. As she approached the high-end shopping district where the shiny glass windows of designer stores reflected a world of wealth and privilege, no one seemed to take much notice of her. People walked past, their eyes averted, as if deliberately avoiding her presence. No one saw the silent story of struggle written on her face. No one saw her, not really, except for one person, Jonathan Harris, the billionaire CEO of a major tech company, was not the sort of man you'd expect to stop in his tracks over something as simple as a poor girl selling water. At 45, he had built an empire from the ground up. His name was synonymous with power, money, and influence. The world revolved around him. Yet today, as he strode confidently down the street, his eyes locked onto hers. A momentary glance, but one that would change both of their lives forever. Jonathan had seen countless faces in his life, most of them eager for his attention, but this girl was different. There was something about her, an aura of quiet desperation, a hidden strength in the way she stood, almost as if she were daring the world to ignore her. And for reasons he couldn't explain, he couldn't tear his gaze away. It wasn't until he was mere feet away from her that he noticed the water bottle in her hand. It was barely half full, the liquid sloshing around in the bottle with every step she took. But it wasn't the water that caught his attention. It was the way she held it, as if it were her only possession, the last thing she had left in this world. Without thinking, Jonathan found himself stopping in front of her. His mind raced. He had every reason to keep walking, to stay within the comfort of his world, but for some reason he couldn't move. "Excuse me," he said, his voice laced with something unfamiliar, a mixture of curiosity and genuine concern. The girl looked up at him, her eyes wary at first, as if she hadn't expected anyone to stop, especially not someone like him. She probably didn't recognize him, but she knew the type, the rich, the powerful, the ones who looked through people. Like her, without a second thought. "Do you need something?" she asked, her voice small, hesitant. She didn't meet his eyes, instead staring at the water bottle in her hands, as if it were the only thing that mattered in the world. Jonathan swallowed, his thoughts disjointed, confused by this strange encounter. He had never felt so out of place in his own skin. The girl was offering him water, but something deeper was at play here, something more than just a transaction. He glanced at the bottle, then back at her. His mind flickered with the realization that he was standing in front of someone who had so little, yet still had the courage to stand in a world that would rather see her disappear. "I'll take one," he said, his voice now almost a whisper. She hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting up to meet his. Jonathan could see the skepticism in her gaze. She probably wondered why someone like him would even want her water, much less ask for it. Without saying a word, she handed him the bottle. Jonathan took it, but instead of reaching for his wallet, he did something entirely unexpected. He pressed a $100 bill into her hand. Her eyes widened in shock. She glanced at the money, then back at him, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to say something, but Jonathan shook his head, stopping her. "Keep it," he said, his voice soft yet firm. "And keep your water." For a moment, neither of them moved. The world seemed to pause around them, as if time itself had taken a deep breath and waited. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the moment ended. Jonathan turned and walked away, the water bottle still clutched in his hand. But as he walked, something stirred deep inside him. He couldn't explain it, he couldn't quite put it into words. It wasn't just the girl or the money. It was something else, something far more complicated and far more personal. What was it about this moment that had shaken him so deeply? Why had he, a man with everything, felt such an overwhelming pull towards someone with so little? And why, as he walked away, did he feel the faintest hint of something he hadn't felt in years? Guilt? Jonathan Harris walked briskly toward his luxury sedan, his mind still caught in the strange encounter he had just had. The warm breeze that swept through the streets did little to calm his racing thoughts. He had been many things in his life: a self-made billionaire, a powerful CEO, a man who controlled industries. But nothing had prepared him for the sensation that came with that moment of brief contact with the poor girl selling water. His grip on the water bottle tightened. As he opened the car door, he slipped into the back seat, tossing the bottle onto the seat beside him. The car's leather interior was as pristine as ever, the perfect reflection of the life he had built, a life of wealth, status, and success. But something felt off. The driver, Carlos, didn't notice. He started the engine, pulling away from the curb and merging into the traffic. Jonathan's eyes remained fixed on the water bottle, the small plastic container of liquid that now seemed to hold more than just water. It held a question, an unresolved tension, a strange sense of guilt. "Sir?" Carlos's voice broke through his thoughts. "Would you like to go to the office now?" Jonathan nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. The office, the empire. He had built the endless meetings. It all seemed so distant in that moment. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and he could suddenly see the disparity between his world and the world of that girl. He had always known it existed, but today it felt different. That girl had forced him to confront something he had been avoiding for years. And what was that something? He didn't know. But he knew that he couldn't shake the feeling of guilt. He had money. She had nothing. The transaction should have been simple, and yet it had left a mark on him. He leaned back in the seat, closing his eyes as the car sped through the city. The sound of the tires on the pavement, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft radio station playing in the background. All of it faded into the background. His mind kept returning to her face, her eyes, the way she held the bottle so carefully, and the hesitation in her voice when she handed it to him. Jonathan had always prided himself on his ability to maintain control over his emotions. He was a man who didn't let anything or anyone get under his skin. But she had done it. With a simple gesture, a moment of connection that lasted no more than a few seconds, she had unsettled him in a way that no business deal, no negotiation, no amount of money had ever been able to do. A deep sigh escaped his lips, and he opened his eyes just as the car slowed to a stop. He glanced out the window and saw the gleaming glass buildings of his corporate headquarters. It should have been a comfort, but all it did was remind him of what he had left behind that day. The world of the wealthy, the privileged, the powerful. And the world he had just glimpsed, with all its struggles and hardships. The car stopped in front of the building, and Jonathan's thoughts scattered as he prepared to step into his world once more. The world where he was a king. He got out of the car and walked into the building, his mind still occupied with the girl. The receptionist greeted him with a warm smile, but Jonathan didn't respond. He was already walking toward the elevator, his thoughts consumed by the memory of the poor girl. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped inside, pressing the button for the top floor. As the elevator began its ascent, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, something he wasn't quite ready to face. The elevator reached the top floor, and Jonathan stepped into his office. His assistant, Sarah, was at her desk, typing away on her computer. She looked up as he entered. "Good afternoon, Mr. Harris," she said, smiling brightly. "We have a meeting scheduled in 30 minutes with the investors from the Asian market." Jonathan nodded, but his thoughts were elsewhere. "Cancel it." Sarah blinked in surprise. "Excuse me?" "I said cancel it," he repeated, more firmly this time. "Postpone everything for the day. I need some time alone." Sarah's expression faltered, but she quickly regained her composure. "Of course, Mr. Harris. I'll let everyone know." Jonathan didn't wait for her response. He turned and walked toward his office, his mind still occupied by the image of the girl with the water bottle. He closed the door behind him, sitting at his desk, but he didn't pick up the phone or review any of the documents in front of him. Instead, he stared at the water bottle still resting on the chair next to him. Why was this bothering him so much? He knew he had done something good. Given the girl money, shown her some small kindness in a world that had none to offer her. But why couldn't he shake the feeling that it wasn't enough? That it wasn't just about the money. It was about something deeper, something that he had been ignoring for years. He glanced out the window, his eyes landing on the sprawling city below. The glass buildings, the luxury cars, the fancy restaurants. It was all so far removed from the reality that girl lived in, and yet somehow she had reached him. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking his thoughts. He picked it up and saw that it was a message from his longtime friend and business partner, Gregory. "Everything okay?" It read, "You've been off the grid today. Want to talk about it?" Jonathan hesitated before typing a reply. "I'm fine. Just need some space." He put the phone down and stood up, walking toward the window. The city stretched out before him, a maze of concrete and steel. But as he stared out at it, the weight of his life, his wealth, his success felt empty. His gaze shifted downward to the streets below, and that was when he saw her again. She was there. The girl. She was standing at the same corner, holding another bottle of water in her hand, offering it to the passing pedestrians. Her face looked just as tired, just as defeated as it had before. But today, something was different. She wasn't alone. A man in a suit had approached her. He was tall, well-dressed, and his smile was wide and fake. Jonathan couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see the girl's body language. She was stiff, guarded, as if she knew this man wasn't offering kindness. He could see her hesitation, the way she looked at him as though weighing something in her mind. Jonathan's heart skipped a beat. What was happening? What was this man doing? As the girl handed him the bottle of water, Jonathan's stomach tightened. Something wasn't right, and before he knew it, he was rushing down the elevator, out of the building, and into the street, his mind racing with thoughts he didn't fully understand. Jonathan's feet hit the pavement with a rapid, urgent rhythm as he made his way across the crowded street. The city's familiar chaos felt distant to him now, as if he were moving in a dream, disconnected from everything around him. His mind raced, a tangled mess of thoughts, questions, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. Why had he felt compelled to leave his office? Why had the sight of that girl and the strange man triggered something inside him that he couldn't explain? As he neared the corner where the girl had been, he saw her again. But this time she wasn't alone. The man in the suit was still there, standing by her side. He was talking to her in low tones, his gestures exaggerated, as if he were trying to convince her of something. The girl, on the other hand, appeared uncomfortable, her posture stiff and closed off. Jonathan could see it clearly from where he stood. She wasn't engaged in the conversation. She was merely enduring it. Jonathan's heart began to pound in his chest. Who was this man? What was his interest in her? He had seen her sell water to strangers before, but this time it felt different. There was something dark, something hidden in this encounter that made Jonathan's instincts flare with suspicion. The girl wasn't just selling water. There was something else going on. Without thinking, Jonathan walked closer, his mind only focused on one thing: finding out the truth. He couldn't explain why he felt so compelled to act, but it was as if some invisible force was pulling him toward her. His curiosity had transformed into something deeper, something more personal. This wasn't just about observing anymore. This was about understanding. As Jonathan reached the corner, he slowed his pace, hoping not to draw attention to himself. The man in the suit didn't seem to notice him, but the girl did. Her eyes flicked toward him for a brief second, and for the first time, Jonathan saw a flash of something more than just tiredness in her expression. It was fear, pure, unfiltered fear. Jonathan's pulse quickened. He couldn't just stand there. He had to do something. "Hey!" Jonathan called out, his voice louder than he intended. The man in the suit turned toward him, a puzzled look crossing his face. The girl stiffened, her eyes darting between Jonathan and the man, as if she were trapped in a web of tension. The man's smile was forced, almost mechanical. "Can I help you, sir?" Jonathan didn't reply right away. Instead, he looked at the girl, his gaze softening. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice quieter now, hoping the man wouldn't hear. The girl's eyes widened. A flicker of something, recognition maybe, or gratitude, passing through them, but it vanished just as quickly, replaced by the same guarded look she had worn earlier. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but the man stepped in before she could. "Say anything. I believe she's fine," the man said smoothly, his tone dismissive. "She's just selling water. Nothing to worry about." Jonathan's eyes narrowed as he sized up the man. There was something about his smooth, practiced demeanor that set off alarm bells in Jonathan's mind. The way he spoke, the way he positioned himself between Jonathan and the girl, all of it screamed manipulation. "I wasn't asking about the water," Jonathan replied, his voice firm. He took a step closer, his eyes not leaving the man. "I'm asking about her." The man's smile faltered for just a moment, but it quickly returned. "You don't need to concern yourself," he said, his words now laced with a subtle edge. "She's under my protection, that's all." Under his protection? Jonathan felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had been right. Something wasn't right here. This man wasn't just some passerby. He was involved in something far more sinister than he was letting on. Jonathan could feel the girl's anxiety radiating from her, and it was all he needed to confirm his suspicions. She wasn't here of her own free will. She was trapped, and the man in front of him was the one holding the strings. He glanced back at the girl, his heart sinking as he saw the flicker of fear in her eyes again. She wanted to speak, to say something, but her voice was silenced by the man's presence. It was clear to Jonathan now that she had no choice. She wasn't here by accident. She had been put in this situation, and the man had control over her. Jonathan's mind raced. He couldn't just walk away. He couldn't let this continue, but what could he do? He was just one man, a businessman, a stranger in this girl's life. What right did he have to intervene? But that wasn't the question, was it? The real question was, what kind of man would he be if he didn't? In that moment, Jonathan made a decision. He wasn't going to stand by and let this continue. He was going to help her. He wasn't sure how or even what he could do, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Not now. He turned his attention back to the man in the suit, who was watching him carefully. "I think you're lying," Jonathan said calmly, his voice firm with resolve. "And I think you know exactly what's going on here." The man's expression hardened, his facade slipping for just a second. But in that moment, Jonathan saw it. A flicker of fear, a subtle shift in his posture. The man was hiding something. And that something was about to come to light. "You don't know what you're talking about," the man replied, his voice low and threatening. "Stay out of this, or you'll regret it." Jonathan didn't flinch. He knew he had to keep his composure. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice cold. "Not until I know the truth." The man stepped closer, now blocking the girl from Jonathan's view. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time Jonathan saw the true malice behind the man's calm exterior. "You don't want to make an enemy of me," he warned, his tone ice-cold. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine, but he didn't back down. "You're the one making an enemy of yourself," he shot back. "I'm not afraid of you, but I will make sure the truth comes out." The man's eyes flickered with something that could only be described as a brief flash of fear. Then, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, he spoke one final warning: "You'll regret this." Before Jonathan could respond, the man turned and walked away, leaving him standing in the middle of the street, his heart pounding in his chest. The girl stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the ground, as if she were waiting for something. For him, maybe, for someone to rescue her. Jonathan watched the man disappear into the crowd, then turned his attention back to the girl. This time he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I'm here to help," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid." For the first time, the girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also a flicker of hope. I don't know what to do," she whispered. "He'll find me. He always does." Jonathan felt his stomach tighten with frustration. He wanted to do more, to fix everything in that instant. But he knew it. Wasn't that simple? He had to be careful. But he also knew one thing. He wasn't going to let this girl suffer in silence any longer. "Then we'll find a way to make sure he never finds you again," Jonathan vowed, his voice steady and filled with determination. The days that followed Jonathan's encounter with the girl felt like a blur. He had tried to contact her, but every time he reached out, she disappeared into the shadows, as if vanishing into the vastness of the city. The weight of the conversation between him and the mysterious man in the suit lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. He couldn't get the image of the girl's fearful eyes out of his head. Jonathan had grown accustomed to controlling every aspect of his life, but this situation was unlike anything he had ever dealt with. And this wasn't about business deals or acquisitions. This was something much more personal, something human. He had told himself that he would help her. But how? He didn't know where she lived or who her family was. All he had was a brief encounter, and a sense of guilt that refused to let him rest. The girl had become a puzzle, one that Jonathan was determined to solve, no matter the cost. His office had been bustling with meetings and endless calls, but in the back of his mind, the girl's face never left him. His thoughts constantly drifted back to that day on the street, the way she looked at him, the fear in her eyes, the way the man had blocked him from getting any closer. It was as if the world was trying to keep him from helping her. Jonathan sat at his desk, staring out the window. The city below was as vibrant as ever, its buildings reflecting the golden hue of the setting sun. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place. Something was hidden just beneath the surface. His phone buzzed, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a message from his assistant, Sarah. "Mr. Harris, you have an urgent call from the police department. They've requested your presence. They said it's regarding a woman who might be involved in something important." Jonathan's pulse quickened. The words important and woman triggered a cascade of thoughts. Was this about the girl? Could they know something? He grabbed his coat and headed for the door, his heart racing as he made his way to the elevator. His mind was clouded with 1,000 possibilities, none of them good. What had happened to her? And why was the police involved? The elevator descended, its gentle hum the only sound in the otherwise quiet building. Jonathan's thoughts kept circling back to the girl. What if she was in danger? What if the man in the suit had hurt her? He had to find out the truth. He had to know if she was okay. The doors opened to the ground floor, and Jonathan stepped out into the lobby. He was met by a uniformed officer, who led him to a small, sterile meeting room. The officer knocked before entering, and Jonathan followed, his heart pounding in his chest. Inside, a detective was waiting, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a stern expression. "Mr. Harris," the detective said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. We have a situation that might concern you." Jonathan shook the detective's hand, his mind racing. "What's going on? Is it about the girl?" The detective nodded slowly, his face grave. "We believe the girl you saw a few days ago is part of something much bigger than you might realize. There's a trafficking ring operating in the area, and she might be involved, though we're not sure of her role yet." Jonathan's stomach dropped. The word trafficking hit him like a punch to the gut. He had feared something like this might be the case, but hearing it spoken out loud made it all too real. "She's in danger," Jonathan said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have to help her." The detective looked at him, his eyes narrowing. "We're trying to find out more. She's been moved around, and we've had a hard time tracking her down. But we do know that the man you saw with her is connected to the ring. He's been seen at various locations, often in the company of vulnerable women like her." Jonathan's mind raced. The man in the suit, the one who had been so protective of her, wasn't just a passerby. He was part of something much darker, and the girl, the one who had captured Jonathan's heart in a way he couldn't explain, was stuck in the middle of it. "Is she still in the city?" Jonathan asked, trying to keep his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. The detective nodded. "We believe so. But she's being watched. We can't get to her without alerting the people behind this." Jonathan clenched his fists. He couldn't wait for the police to make their move. He had to act now, before it was too late. "I want to help," he said, his voice firm. "What do you need from me?" The detective hesitated for a moment, then sighed. "We've been tracking this ring for months, but it's like trying to catch smoke with your hands. If you can find her, if you can get close to her again, we might be able to get the information we need to take them down. But it's risky." Jonathan didn't hesitate. "I don't care about the risks. I need to find her." The detective gave him a long look, as if weighing his words. "Fine," he said, pulling out a small notepad. He scribbled something down and handed it to Jonathan. "This is the last known location where we traced her. It's a safe house, but be careful. These people don't play by the rules. If you're spotted, it could all fall apart." Jonathan nodded, pocketing the note. He didn't need to hear any more. The urgency in his chest was now overwhelming, the need to save her consuming every part of him. He walked out of the room without another word, his mind set on one thing: finding her. Jonathan's car sped through the streets, the city blurring around him as he made his way to the address the detective had given him. His heart was racing, and his hands clenched the steering wheel as he tried to focus. This was it. This was his chance to save her. As he approached the building, an unassuming, run-down apartment complex on the edge of the city, his heart sank. It looked like the kind of place where people disappeared, never to be seen again. He parked the car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the distance on foot. The street was quiet, the buildings around him dark and oppressive. As he neared the entrance to the building, he took a deep breath and steeled himself. He had no idea what he was walking into, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't leaving without her. He entered the building cautiously, keeping his footsteps quiet. As he ascended the narrow staircase, The air was thick with the smell of mildew, and the walls seemed to close in on him as he moved up the stairs. The building felt like a tomb, and every step he took brought him closer to something dangerous, something he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He reached the third floor, and there it was, apartment 305. The door was slightly ajar, and Jonathan's pulse quickened. He wasn't sure what he would find inside, but he knew he had to act fast. He pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. Jonathan pushed the door open cautiously, the dim light from the hallway spilling into the apartment. He could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on him, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. Everything about this place screamed danger. The peeling wallpaper, the faint smell of something musty and old, and the overwhelming sense of neglect that hung in the air. But it wasn't the apartment itself that concerned him. It was what or who might be inside. He stepped further into the room, his eyes adjusting to the low light. The place was sparse, almost barren. A small couch, a few chairs, a coffee table with a few magazines scattered on top. There was nothing about it that screamed luxury or comfort. It looked like a place for people who had nowhere else to go, a place where lives were quietly ruined. Jonathan's heart pounded in his chest as he scanned the room. Where was she? He had to find her. Suddenly, he heard a faint sound, a soft rustling coming from behind the closed door at the far end of the apartment. His pulse quickened. Could it be her? He moved quickly but quietly toward the door, his breath shallow as he reached for the handle. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. What would he find? Would it be her, or had he walked into a trap? The room beyond was dark, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. The girl was sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, looking up at him with wide, fearful eyes. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes as if she hadn't slept in days. At the sight of him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and relief. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out at first. Jonathan's heart tightened as he saw the weight of her suffering in her gaze. "Are you okay?" Jonathan's voice was barely above a whisper as he knelt beside her. He didn't want to startle her. He didn't want to do anything that might push her further into herself. The girl swallowed hard before speaking, her voice barely audible. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously toward the door. "He'll come back. He'll hurt you." Jonathan felt a rush of frustration and helplessness. The man, the one she was afraid of, had been with her on that street corner. The one who seemed to control her every move. He was still out there, waiting for his next opportunity to strike. "I'm not leaving you," Jonathan said firmly. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "I'm here to help you. I won't let anything happen to you." She shook, her head slowly, tears welling in her eyes. "It's too late for me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't even know who I am anymore. He made me do things I never thought I could." Jonathan's chest tightened with emotion, but he kept his voice steady. "What's his name? The man who's been controlling you?" The girl looked up at him, her eyes filled with both fear and a quiet desperation. "His name is Marco," she said. He's the one who got me into this. I didn't have a choice. I was just a kid when he found me. I didn't know what I was getting into." Jonathan's mind raced. Marco, the man who had been so quick to dismiss him that day, the one who had tried to shield her from his gaze. He was more than just a casual passerby. He was the puppet master behind it all. "Where is he now?" Jonathan asked, his voice harder now, filled with the weight of the situation. "He's out there," she whispered, nodding toward the window. "He always watches. He won't let me go, not unless I do exactly what he says." Jonathan's heart broke at her words. He knew she was trapped, caught in a cycle of fear and control that was hard to escape from, but he couldn't let her. Give up, not now. We're going to get you out of here, he said firmly, placing a hand on her shoulder. I promise you. The girl looked up at him, her eyes searching his face as if she were trying to gauge whether he was serious. But how? How can you help me? She asked, her voice trembling. Jonathan didn't have a clear answer. He had no idea how he would get her out of this situation, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her stay here. Not in this room, not under Marco's control. I'll do whatever it takes, Jonathan said, his voice filled with resolve. But we need to get out of here. We need to move quickly before he comes back. The girl hesitated for a moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'll go with you. But you have to promise me one thing. Anything, Jonathan replied without hesitation. You have to promise me that you won't let him find me again, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. He'll hurt me. He'll make me do terrible things. Please, promise me you won't let him hurt me anymore. Jonathan's heart ached at her words. He had already promised her he wouldn't let anything happen to her, but hearing her speak those words, hearing the pain and fear in her voice, made the promise feel heavier. He couldn't fail her. I promise, he said, his voice filled with determination. I won't let him hurt you again. The girl nodded, wiping away a tear from her cheek. Thank you, she whispered, her voice trembling. Jonathan stood up, offering her a hand. Come on, we need to go now. She hesitated for a moment, then took his hand, allowing him to help her to her feet. As they made their way to the door, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone, that Marco was watching them, waiting for them to make a move. He glanced around the room, his senses heightened. Everything seemed too quiet, too still. They were about to leave, but Jonathan had a feeling that something was off, something wasn't right. Suddenly the door slammed open, and a figure stood in the doorway. Marco. His eyes were cold, calculating, and filled with fury. He had been watching them the entire time. Jonathan froze, his blood running cold. Marco was bigger than he had imagined, his frame broad and menacing. The air in the room grew heavy, the tension palpable. You shouldn't have come here, Marco said, his voice low and threatening. She's mine. You don't get to take her away. Jonathan took a step forward, his body tense. I'm not leaving without her. Marco's lips curled into a cruel smile. Then you'll have to go through me first. The air in the room was thick with tension. Jonathan stood in the doorway, staring at Marco, his heart pounding in his chest. The girl. No, she wasn't just some girl anymore. She was someone Jonathan had promised to protect. Someone he had committed himself to help, no matter the cost. Marco's eyes locked onto Jonathan's with a dangerous gleam. The way he stood in the doorway, tall and imposing, was enough to make anyone back down. But Jonathan wasn't anyone. Jonathan's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his body tense, ready for whatever was about to happen. His mind raced, calculating his options, but all he could focus on was one thing. He couldn't let this man hurt her. He had made a promise, and he wasn't going to break it. Marco's lips twisted into a menacing grin. You really think you can take me on? His voice was low and mocking, filled with years of power and control. Jonathan took a deep breath. I don't need to take you on, he said, his voice calm but firm. I just need to get her out of here. Marco's eyes narrowed. You don't get to just walk away with her, he sneered. She's mine. I've invested in her. I've given her a life, or rather, what's left of it. You think you can just sweep in and save the day. You're nothing but a rich man playing pretend. You have no idea what's really going on here. The girl beside Jonathan flinched at Marco's words, her eyes filling with fear. Jonathan could see the terror in her face, the way she trembled, as if Marco's words were a cruel reminder of everything she had suffered. But Jonathan couldn't let that stop him. He couldn't let Marco's words sink in. He had seen through Marco's lies. This wasn't about control. This was about exploitation. This was about a man who had taken advantage of her, broken her spirit, and used her as a pawn in his twisted game. "I don't care what you think you've done," Jonathan said, his voice hardening. "She's not yours. She's a human being, not a possession, and I'm taking her out of here." Marco took a step forward, his fists tightening. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he growled. "You think you can walk in here and change things? I'll make sure you regret this." Jonathan stood his ground. "You don't scare me," he said, his voice steady. He had faced boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, and countless high-stakes negotiations, but nothing had ever felt as high stakes as this moment. But Marco wasn't just going to let them walk out. He lunged forward, his hand reaching for Jonathan's collar. In one swift movement, Jonathan sidestepped and grabbed Marco's wrist, twisting it behind his back. The move was clean, controlled, but there was a cold anger inside Jonathan now. He was done playing games. Marco stumbled forward, his face contorting with pain as he tried to break free. "You're making a big mistake, rich boy," he spat. "I've already made it," Jonathan shot back, his grip tightening. "And I'm not backing down." The girl, standing behind Jonathan, watched the struggle unfold. Her eyes were wide with disbelief. She had never seen anyone stand up to Marco like this before. For so long, she had believed that there was no escape, that this was just the way life was. But Jonathan had shown her a glimpse of something different, a life outside the dark cage Marco had built around her. Jonathan didn't waste another second. He pushed Marco away, sending him stumbling back into the wall. Marco recovered quickly, his fury evident, but Jonathan didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl's hand, pulling her toward the door. "Come on," Jonathan urged, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "We're leaving." The girl hesitated for a moment, her body frozen with fear. But Jonathan's grip was firm, and for the first time she felt a sense of trust in her chest, a glimmer of hope. She nodded, her eyes meeting Jonathan's. This wasn't just about running away anymore. It was about freedom. It was about finally taking control of her life. Together, they rushed through the door and into the hallway, the sound of Marco's angry shouts echoing behind them. Jonathan didn't look back. He didn't need to. Marco had lost his grip on her. She was free now, and nothing could take that away. They ran down the stairs, the noise of Marco's pursuit growing fainter. As they stepped into the street, Jonathan paused, glancing around for any sign of danger. The city felt different now, less oppressive, less threatening. He knew they couldn't stop here. They needed to get somewhere safe, somewhere Marco couldn't reach them. The girl was still holding onto his hand, her grip tight, but not out of fear. It was as if she was holding onto the last thread of her life, the last thread of hope. "We need to get you out of the city," Jonathan said, his voice steady as he scanned the streets. "I have a safe place we can go, but we have to hurry." The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for saving me." Jonathan squeezed her hand. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you. You're safe now." The sound of a car engine caught Jonathan's attention. He turned to see a black SUV pulling up beside them. The door opened, and out stepped two men. Men Jonathan didn't recognize, but who looked like they were there for one purpose only, to make sure the girl didn't escape. "Get in the car," one of the men said, his voice low and threatening. Jonathan stepped in front of the girl, his body tensing. He wasn't going to let them take her. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "Stay behind me," Jonathan ordered the girl, his voice fierce. "I'll handle this." The two men eyed him warily, sizing him up, but neither of them moved closer. Jonathan's stance was firm, his eyes cold with resolve. "You're not taking her anywhere," he said, his voice unwavering. For a moment there was silence. Then One of the men took a step back, reaching for his phone. Jonathan knew what they were doing. They were calling for reinforcements, but Jonathan wasn't going to wait around. He couldn't. Without warning, he grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her toward a nearby alley, away from the car and the men. "This way," he said urgently, his heart pounding in his chest. They needed to move quickly before the men could react. They ran through the alley, the sounds of the men shouting behind them. Jonathan glanced over his shoulder, his eyes scanning. The shadows, ready for anything, but he couldn't afford to stop now. They had to keep going. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, secluded street. Jonathan stopped for a moment, catching his breath. He turned to the girl, his eyes softening. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The girl nodded, her breath shaky but steady. "Thank you," she said again, her voice barely above. A whisper. "I never thought I'd get out." Jonathan smiled, though it was tinged with exhaustion. "You don't need to thank me," he said. "This is your freedom. You earned it." They finally reached Jonathan's car, where his driver was waiting. Jonathan helped the girl inside, then slid into the front seat. As the car pulled away, he glanced at the girl beside him. For the first time, she looked at peace, the weight of the past lifting just a little. Jonathan didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time in a long time, he felt that whatever happened, they would face it together. They would make sure she never had to look over her shoulder again. The lesson: Jonathan had come into this story with all the wealth and power in the world, but he had learned something much more valuable than money or status. He had learned that true power came not from controlling others, but from giving others the chance to control their own lives. It came from standing up against injustice, even when it seemed impossible. And most of all, it came from showing kindness when the world had shown nothing but cruelty. The girl, now free from Marco's grasp, was not just a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor, a fighter, and in that moment she realized that she held the power to shape her own future. And as for Jonathan, he knew he would never forget this lesson, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is help someone else find their way. The end.